Thank you all for being here. Glad you're with us. In just a minute or two, you're going to hear from our featured speaker, Michael Blanche. Really, really glad that he's with us today. Our topic is essentially about process addictions or behavioral addictions in the young population, the teen population. It's no secret that stress and anxiety have really been problematic for our young people in the past several years on this pre-COVID world that we're living in. So it's also not surprising that they might turn to substances or other behaviors to cope with some of the challenges that they're facing. So I appreciate that many of you, at least several of you, submitted some questions ahead of time. And it was interesting to see that most of those questions were about technology. And so I'm especially grateful that Mike is our speaker today because he is truly one of our region's experts on this topic. He has spoken on technology, social media, gaming, gambling, all these sorts of things that tend to, be very readily available to our kids. But we'll talk about some of the things as well. So very glad that Mike is with us. Thank you to our community partner. This would be the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. So thank you to them for hosting today's program. So just a word about our speaker. Michael Blanche is the co-founder of Ethos Treatment. He's a licensed clinical social worker with more than 20 years of experience providing direct clinical treatment for those who are dually diagnosed with addiction and other psychological issues. Michael's worked in all levels of care in the treatment of addiction and mental health. He's a leading expert in the field of prevention, specializing in middle school and high school prevention talks and staff development, providing CEUs on the impact of technology, process addictions, complex trauma, young adult substance use, and dual diagnosis are just a few workshop titles he has facilitated. Michael's known for working with complex individuals and their families, assisting in difficult times of discerning the appropriate level of care or proper placement. He also happens to be the clinical advisor for our organization, Be a Part of the Conversation, for which I am eternally grateful. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike. You're muted.
You gotta love that. After how many years of doing these presentations on Zoom, I still will mute myself sometime. But first, again, thank you, Kim, for the opportunity and Be a Part of the Conversation in Montgomery County for offering this opportunity. Kim and I were talking right before that we're excited about the number of folks that signed up on an afternoon, a beautiful afternoon. So I appreciate you taking your time to participate in something like this. A couple notes before I get really into it is, as Kim said, most of my career has been working with adolescents and young adults that struggle with substance use disorder, as well as for this term, I'll use the term process addictions. I'll explain what that means in a little bit. But to be clear again, like as most of my career has been working with adolescents, translation, I'm used to getting interrupted. So I'm totally open to, would like today, we only have a brief window of time. So if you have specific questions and you want to put it in the chat, don't hesitate to do that. If you don't feel comfortable, putting your hand up and I'll try to look for you or we'll look for you. But I think it's easiest for me to read the questions. And by the way, your questions that were already submitted were great questions that I'll address right away as soon as I can during a brief presentation. But I'd, again, rather it be a conversation as the foundation of being a part of the conversation is more around conversation and less around having experts kind of share what I'd like to, but it's more around what your feedback is and what you're needing to hear about. So again, at any time, please put in the chat any questions that you have. So why I was excited to be here today is because any chance I can have the opportunity to speak with loved ones, parents, I assume community members that are seeing what I see on a regular routine basis, our youth, our at-risk youth, and what we're really struggling with adolescents in the last 4 years. The impact of COVID has had a tremendous impact on our adolescent development. It has interrupted adolescent development. And what we've seen is it has fractionalized a lot of adolescents, bringing to the forefront a lot of mental health issues focused in around and fixated on this idea of isolation. My wife, Dr. Caroline Fankel, does a great presentation on isolation, and I steal a lot from her work and her research, seeing in the last 3 years because of COVID, because we were told to go home, stay at home and watch out, not just because of that, but because of other multiple factors going on, that our kids are feeling more isolated, more disconnected, despite there's this great thing called, I don't know if you can see this, we all have these devices, right? Some of you are actually on your devices. But these things sometimes are great, but certain kids are at risk to seeing these in an unhealthy way. So if your child has a mental health issue, if they have ADHD or anxiety, if they have a potential or a predisposition to addiction, we got to talk about these things right away. Technology is not the enemy. Technology is not the problem. It's how we manage it, how we communicate it, how we negotiate it. And for those questions that I kept seeing and how we renegotiate it at any stage of development, at any time. Just because your kids might be a junior in high school, senior in high school, just because your kids might be 13, 14, doesn't mean, all right, the train's left the station, their devices are already in their hands, we can't control them. The truth is, at any time, we can renegotiate our relationship with technology, and at any time, you as parents can renegotiate your contracts and what you want to see in this if you're worried about your kids and technology. And I'll come back to that. But let me first start by saying I want to define what process addictions are, because a lot of people have a lot of ideas in it. And the short version is, with adolescents and particularly, the reason why they're so vulnerable to what's called process addiction is they're trying to find themselves. It's a part of normal adolescent development to identify with a group, to identify a sense of being, to a part like some type of connection, and they're trying to figure out who they are. Normal, healthy, appropriate stage of development. But kids with anxiety or kids with mental health issues, or again, kids with a predisposition to addictive symptomology, if it's in their family of origin, might be prone to chasing something and fixating and over-attaching meaning to one thing to give them happiness. So process addictions are rooted in what's called attachment theory. You can Google that, it'll come right up. There's great literature and research on what's called attachment theory, which could be for kids over-attaching too much meaning onto one thing to give them happiness. And so in process addiction terms, chasing an external to make your insides feel better. So a lot of times kids will look outside of themselves to make them feel good about their insides. So a lot of kids will do this with clothes, with how they look on the outside, body image issues with men and women, clothing of like they have to wear certain clothing to feel like they fit in, but to that extreme where they're chasing that external, fixated on those external things like money, like video games, like gaming addiction, which is real, which really does happen. And I'll give you a little bit of updates on gaming addiction in a little bit. But this idea of chasing an external, kids are searching and seeking and maybe over-attaching too much meaning on medication, or mismanaging medication, or looking for a quicker fix to deal with something that they need to process. So they'd rather look to relationships. They'd rather chase a relationship. And if they have their boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other in their life, then they'll feel better about their identity themselves. But then it's a crushing where they look just for that one person to give them happiness. That's where I really worry. And then ultimately with substance use disorder, when chasing a substance, and we know with substance use disorder, the earlier the onset of the exposure of that substance, the more likely it is there's a problem later in life. And kids are getting exposed to substances. By the way, 80% of kids are getting exposed to substances from a social media perspective first before they see it in real life. And so the oversaturation and not really having healthy conversations around social media and the impact of social media on our adolescents, that's been happening for the last 10 years. And I've been giving this talk for 15 years, 16 years. But the truth is, it's only gotten more challenging, more complex. So when we talk about tech addiction, which is a real thing, what do you think I mean by that? Tech addiction is basically this. I want to explain kind of what kids are up against, and what they're seeing. I just wanted to check the chat for a second. So everybody remembers this beautiful thing called YouTube, right? Everybody's been around YouTube, been on the internet, and they know YouTube. But YouTube in 2006, 2007 was kind of flatlining. What people were watching, and they weren't getting new viewership or longer viewership. And then all of a sudden, this great team from Google brought this algorithm. So if you like this cat video, you might like this cat video. And isn't that nice that Google started to take information about us, and they started to track information? Isn't that nice that they want us to watch a movie that we like, so they're going to suggest certain things? And isn't that on paper from 50 yards away sound okay? So imagine them starting to take data point after data point after data point, and the next thing you know, they have trackable, identifiable information now that is profiling what type of information you would like to consume. And so what happens with adolescents especially is they get exposed to a thing called TikTok. Parents, you might be worried about this thing called TikTok. The truth is TikTok had a decade of trackable, identifiable algorithms that worked through Google and all those things. They took a lot of that information. So when they launched TikTok, it was years ahead of its game. They had algorithms down. So the way you swipe, they had algorithms down of how your kid swipes, or how long they wait or pause to listen to a song or listen to a track on TikTok. So they were able to really finite the searches to have kids stay on longer, and their retention rates are gone off the charts. And so kids are already, early stage development, fragile developmental stages, susceptible neurologically speaking, and then all of a sudden throwing this right in their face, and they're getting sucked into this algorithm of addiction. And so part of my job is, again, to not say that technology is, again, bad, but it's to inform kids and inform you as parents that we really need to reorganize ourselves up against this, and raise our consciousness and raise our awareness of what we're up against. Just like alcohol, for instance, I'm not a prohibitionist on alcohol. I'm not telling people not to drink at all. People that come in with substance use disorder, absolutely. But when it comes to average people, I'm okay with people drinking. I'm not out there shutting down bars, and I'm not out there shutting down technology. But for both, I'd like to raise people's consciousness awareness around how highly addictive these algorithms are behind the technology, behind these social media devices. So that's a critical concern right away when it comes to tech addiction. So many kids look to meaning. So many kids look for connection, and they feel, and you will hear this, and this was one of the questions I read already, that, my kid thinks that this is their only lifeline. This is their only thing that provides them hope, or this is my only friend group. And that over-attachment statement is a big deal. But to go to the other extreme of ripping it away from them and just going cold turkey was one of the other questions. I don't recommend cold turkey. I don't recommend complete abstinence, but a reorganization, a reevaluation of it. And I'm going to talk about tactics in a little bit. But I wanted to plant that seed right away in my talk, that they're around it, they're in it, they're digital natives. They're not just digital natives. They were born with technology around them, but they're also social media natives. Think about the dawn of 2007, 2008 of Facebook, 2009, 2010. So adolescents and kids in high school have been around social media. Most kids I talk to, I'm in schools all up and down the Philadelphia area, and I talk to kids every day that they had an Instagram account in 5th grade, 6th grade. They had Instagram, and they had social media, and they had Snapchat, 7th grade, 8th grade. That's a norm for these kids. So they got so highly exposed to it at such an early age that it's a part of their identity, that they need to just evaluate their identity and evaluate their relationship with it, so that it's not all who they see and how they see themselves through the lens of social media. Not only is there apps that'll change, your facial expressions, or apps that'll change whether or not you have pimples on your face or make you look thinner or taller or shorter, but it's also just how it represents reality. Most kids, most adolescents know that social media is not a true representation of reality. But some kids fall suspect to thinking that's how everybody is, or that's how everybody goes. If you think about it, how many kids are posting, I stayed in with my parents on a Friday night and ate frozen yogurt? How many kids are posting healthy decisional process making? How many kids are posting how they felt about themselves the next day after a big event? No, it's the highlight reel. Social media is just a highlight reel of the happenings, the best parts, the greatest parts of the weekend. For instance, Kim, you may have seen, we went to a wedding this weekend, and my wife's a big fan of posting great pictures of our friend's wedding we went to, but she didn't post how we got stuck in traffic getting there, and she didn't post how it wasn't really fun. It was raining on different parts, but it looked amazing, I'm sure, according to my wife's social media. And we do it as adults. We see it as adults every day. But with kids, certain kids with anxiety, certain kids with mental health issues, and definitely kids with substance use disorder and that genetic predisposition, they're susceptible to try to create too much meaning to those things and over-attach too much meaning and think that's what reality is. And then they think that's what they have to live up to. And that's the other scarier part too, when they have friends that are older friends in high school or college, and they're only shown like the perfect image from the party. I don't know what age people are on this call, and I apologize, I'm going to make a guess that I'll say for myself, I was raised in an age where we didn't have social media, and I was up against the myth from that party last weekend. I was up against the myth of, oh, did you hear about that event down on Memorial Day weekend? Now, this past weekend, I have kids in Philadelphia that are in treatment with us at Ethos at one of our centers that are so perplexed and so preoccupied with what's going on down the shore because they could see live image footing, live videos, not just images, but videos of what's happening down there on Snapchat, on social media websites, on TikTok. So they're seeing what their friends are doing in live action. They feel a major case of what's called FOMO, fear of missing out. And with adolescents that already have anxiety, already have mental health issues, that's just another factor. They get that anxiety going and they feel like they need to live up to so many different aspects of life. So that FOMO is a big deal as well. And so when it comes to this device, when it comes to social media, I was just sitting with a parent earlier today, and he was worried about how much time his son was spending on social media. And so we talked about what is, a fair amount of hours. And that's a question I get every day. And, he started with saying 5 hours. He thinks 5 hours is okay as a number. And I said, well, how many hours is your son on his phone today? And he said 7 to 8 hours. I said, okay, let's map this out. So there's 24 hours in a day. So then there's 8 hours you're supposed to sleep. And then there's 6 or 7 or 8 hours you should be in school. And then maybe 1 or 2 hours you should be involved in some activity outside of school. And then maybe sit around and study for an hour. And then maybe having family time for an hour. So that should be about 4, 3, 2. But if you're on 8 hours, and the truth is his son's on his device all through school. And I'm not throwing schools under the bus. I have a lot of respect. Schools are really struggling with this as well. But if they're on their devices all day long, all interactive, and looking at this and not knowing how to make eye contact, not knowing how to connect with people. This dad, P.S., was worried about his son having some depression symptoms because he's seeing some concerns that he's not connecting. And we talked today about this thing called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a natural drug that when we're giving live talks and I can see people's reactions and I can see people's faces, I get a sense of real neurologic release called oxytocin. It's a natural drug that goes off in your brain. We have that sense of connection. That's lost when I'm staring at a screen. Even today, I love doing these presentations. Don't get me wrong, but I'm still in my office staring at a laptop, looking at a screen. And I'd rather be looking at you as an audience. I'd rather be talking with you and seeing your concerns and hearing and seeing your nonverbal cues. Some research says 87%, some up to 93% of communication's nonverbal. How you tone it, how you say it, your frame, your body posture. And if someone asks you, how are you doing versus how are you doing? It's a very different question than saying, where were you last night? I was worried versus where were you last night? I was worried. There's a difference of tone. There's a difference that all that's lost when we text our kids, or we text somebody we love, or we text somebody an update, all that gets lost in translation. Now, again, these are vehicles, these are ways, these are things that we can do to connect. But I just ask people and challenge people to think about how they can be disconnecting, to think about how we want to make sure our kids are not losing themselves in this, but learning how. And we talked about with this dad today, was talking about not taking the phone away, but looking at technology-free times, technology-free zones, technology-free parts of his life. So he starts to have a better perspective on his relationship with technology. And then the other piece that I'll tell you right away was this dad and I were talking, it came from him today. I love when I'm giving a talk and it's brought up in a therapy session on the same day. He's a great guy. And he said he has his son text him at the end of every day now, a screenshot of his Apple ID of activity of when he's on, what he's on. So I don't know if you know this, on every device, you can actually find in your settings how much and what apps you're on and what time. And so they track data even on your iPhone. So the kid screenshots it and sends it to his dad every night. So there's an accountability measure because the kid knows he's struggling with it. The kid understands that he's got some depression, and the kid knows that he really doesn't feel good after hours of play on the internet. And again, it's not all bad. And I'll talk about why it's not, but too much of an over attachment to it. That's where we get into it. And so it's accountability, raising awareness, understanding, thinking about it. It's getting a kid to understand this technology and being an active consumer and know what you're consuming versus mindlessly scrolling, mindlessly not giving it thought, and all of a sudden it being a bigger problem than what it needs to be. You know, I look at technology like food. I look at technology like anything in our world. We just want to raise our consciousness and awareness of what the product is and how complex it is, and to be really mindful of its complexity. And so we need technology-free times. We need technology-free zones. And so as parents, can you imagine saying to your kids, hey, you know, can you imagine technology-free Tuesday and Thursday nights for dinner? Or, hey, and really shutting off and not watching a TV show and not having your laptops out or not having a different device out. But hey, can we really shut down and really talk or go for a walk or do something together as a family to communicate differently and strengthen those other ways of communication? And not to say that the kid won't want to communicate with his friends online, or, you know, this dad was telling me the story. He's on his video game, and he's on his video game a fair amount, and he likes to watch other video game players. And the son brought up a really good argument with the dad. He goes, well, you're a golfer. You like to watch videos on how to play golf better. I'm watching videos on how to play my video game better. And the dad was like, he's kind of right. But, and I turned to the dad, I'm like, but are you on it 6 hours a day? And the guy said, no. You know, and so that's where it's like, we got to help our kids be more functioning and understand the reality that we can't, just a part-time job if you think about the amount of hours that kids dedicate to this thing. And so when it comes to interactions and their time on how much they spend on the device, how many times have you asked your kids, you know, let me look at this device and let me sit down with you and see, what are you on? What apps are you on? Why are you on this app? What do you like about it? And so be curious, be interested, ask your kids about their devices and their interactions. What video games are they on? What do they listen to when they're on their video games? Do they listen or do they not listen? And so with video game production, I always like to share this one little number because I don't remember numbers that well. So I always want to quote the actual number. So let me just pull up the number really quick. In 2021, no, I'll say this. In 2012, it was $20 billion in 2012 was what the gaming industry was about. And how much money it was making, and gross income was 20 billion in 2012. And in 2021, it was 85 billion in 2021. And so when it comes to the amount of growth of this industry alone, the video game industry has taken off. 51% of the market is on mobile devices. And And that is huge. Versus, the other piece that I always like to compare is Pac-Man. Everybody always remembers that great game. Pac-Man generated $7 million in total sales in 1982. We're talking 85 billion in 2021. And that is, 60 more million than 10 years prior. And so it's a big industry. It's a big growth. And lastly, the other big concern I always tell people to think about when it comes to the video game industry is the average age of a video gamer. The average age of a video gamer is 30 years old. And so when it comes to, the average age of a video gamer, what are your kids getting exposed to? What are they listening to? How old are your kids? That's a question that I ask every parent to consider, because your backyards got really big. Our backyards got really big. And so these things have connected people, but also have connected people across the globe. And so we have to be mindful of what they're hearing, what they're listening to. So again, be curious, ask them questions, get into it. Because the video game industry has, again, identifiable, trackable information on their gamification of how they play and how they interact. So a game like Call of Duty had 10 versions of 10 years of a decade of information. So when they flipped the script and went to this game called Fortnite, and they went to mobile devices, they had all this gamification play, and the free game, the free year that it came out, Fortnite was on a mobile device, made $1.2 billion. Made $1.2 billion its first year, because you get to a level and then you have to pay to play. And you get to a level and you have to pay something to play more. So you have to know the gaming industry has identifiable, trackable behavior on kids to want to play more. And it's just really hard to get kids off of video games, and having conversations with them about what they're subjected to. Now, most of you parents or most of you adults know that kids resist wanting to just kind of go with the status quo. And that's part of what I do with adolescents. I challenge kids to resist, the commercial aspect of these video game industry that want kids to play longer. So I play into adolescent development. That is a healthy, appropriate thing to resist what's coming at them, to question everything that's coming at them, and ask them to think about what they're digesting when it comes to video games, technology, social media. And that's another way to kind of get at kids. Before I move on, though, any questions so far? Is this hopefully what you were looking to get out of today? And I'll even ask Kim and Judy if there's any specifics that I'll get into a little bit more, but I wanted to ask first, do you have any questions overall?
No, I think we're good. I don't see any questions. We would love to hear from you all, though, what you're experiencing. And I know we have some prevention providers on here, so I'm curious to know if any of you have seen these kinds of things come up in the work that you're doing with young people in the school districts. So please either raise a hand or unmute and chime in if you'd like.
No problem.
You're covering everything.
I'll go back.
Okay.
So when it comes to a normal part of adolescence, sorry, was someone going to say something? Sorry, I thought I heard somebody. Nope. Okay. So a normal part of adolescent development, an appropriate part of adolescent development, the last part of the brain that fully develops is the frontal lobe of the brain. The frontal lobe of the brain for kids and adolescents and young adults, PS, because the frontal lobe of the brain, last part of the brain that fully develops, stops around 24, 25 years old. So adolescents and young adults, a part of the brain that is last to develop is impulse control, ability to think through things, ability to manage, ability to self-regulate. That's the frontal lobe of the brain. That's that last part of the brain that fully develops. ADHD, mismanagement of energy and time and attention, a mismanagement of attention, where kids can hyperfocus and play video games, but not know how to read a paragraph. That ADHD is a frontal lobe of the brain piece. Anxiety, a disorganization and high acute anxiety is a frontal lobe of the brain piece. So the reason why I wanted to start with this frontal lobe of the brain discussion is impulsivity. And so many kids that can't self-regulate, can't learn how to self-regulate, And that's where we're worried about their then susceptibility to over-attach this one device to learn how to self-regulate. So if you think about it, how many of you, and so as a therapist, I turn off my notifications whenever I give a talk, when I'm in a therapy session. And so many times I'll get out of a session and I'll get 5 text messages from an adolescent I'm working with who's like, why haven't you texted me back? Where are you? I just need to answer this one question. What? And it's like back to back to back to back to back to back. And they don't realize that like adults sometimes can't check their text messages or can't respond. And that impulse control of a kid being able to sit with their own feelings, they can't sit with their own feelings. So they need a response. They need that connection. They need that resolve right away. And so learning how to sit and wait, is no joke, a big part of adolescent development. And instead, we've developed a system where Google it is now a verb. To Google something, we don't have to sit with an uncomfortability of not knowing an answer or have to wait to find out an answer. You can Google something and look something up. In some respects, it could be very anxiety reduction. In some respects, it could be really helpful. But to help a kid to learn how to struggle and wait is a big part of normal adolescent development. That's a kind of critical concern too. So kids learning how to impulse control, self-regulate, they're over-attaching to this device. They're leaning on this and not learning how to take pause, take a breath, take a moment. How many of us, sometimes are going too fast and not being able to slow down and just take a moment and take a breath. So a lot of my work with adolescents, young adults especially, is take a breath, learning how to breathe, learning how to sit and the uncomfortability of something that's unresolved or not having a clear answer today, but knowing that we'll be able to get to that. So this instant gratification is reinforced. This instant resolve or this illusion of instant resolve happens a lot of times with technology where they think they've got a quick answer and then they just keep moving. Somebody just asked, is there a certain amount of time is recommended for game time or screen time? And if they're allowed that time, when is it overdue? You have to take their phone or game away for a system. And how would you stop them without the fight of being the bad guy? Great question. Appreciate it. So I'd like to not answer it in a very specific way in allotment of time, but I can answer this. You as parents and professionals have an idea of allotment of time. When I did that earlier, when I kind of rolled out 8 hours of sleep, for instance, and I focus in on certain times during the day, which kids are more susceptible to problematic relationship times. So the first, I would ask you to consider this. When are kids on their video devices, or when are kids playing video games, or when or what time are their devices? When I give this talk in person, I always like to see this answer because I see people's honest response. I'll ask people, what's the last thing you do before you go to bed? And what's the first thing you do when you wake up? And if it's check this device, that's not great. You think about it, early on in the morning, your brains are not awake. They're not alert. And we're very susceptible in that sleep state of just getting conscious, just getting awake. And how many of us, it's right on our end tables. We grab it. I check and I see who's texted me from the night before, who's emailed me. And I'm not even cognitive. And all of a sudden, I'm getting this threads of going and thoughts. And then what's the last thing I do before I go to bed? Oh, I use it as an alarm, so I got to keep it right by my bed. But if the last thing you're doing is scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, when you're just about to sleep, when you're vulnerable and you're not conscious and you're thinking about things, same thing goes for video games. So the big challenge with video gamers is I challenge guys and ladies to look at what time of day are they on. And 9 times out of 10, they're always at the end of the day. They're always when they're exhausted. And they're always like at 10 o'clock at night. And because they did all their homework and everything's done and they can just play for an hour or two. But you think about the stimuli of a video game and how much stimuli they're on it, and that affects sleep. And so I'm always looking at sleep. I'm always looking at how they wake up, how they go to bed. And that's more of a factor I look at from the start. Then how long is too long? And what are they other factors? Are they showing up to school? Are they getting good grades? Are they living life? Are they doing everything right? And they play video games a couple hours a day. And they'll go for a couple days and not play. And they might have a new game, play it for a week or two, put it down, move on, do a lot of other things, and then get back to it. That's one thing. Versus if you have a kid that 2 hours a day, if they don't have it for those 2 hours, they're preoccupied, they're talking about it, and then they're done playing the game, but they're allowed technology time after that, and all they're consumed with is then the YouTube videos, the website that you follow other video gamers. It's if their whole world is just on this game, that's the profile that the kid that I look out for. And then you may need to be the bad cop, and then you might need to sit down with them and talk about breaking up their relationship and interrupting their relationship with this video game, and starting with a series of, hey, listen, I don't want to take it away. I don't want to take it away from you, but can we give it a rest and have a weekend off of it? Can we have a day off it and see how they do without it? So think about it like from an addiction standpoint, like a harm reduction approach. So see if they can identify the harmful behavior with it, see if they can identify the unhealthy relationship with it, the time of day, how long they're on it for, and see if they can self-regulate and talk to them about it and give them an opportunity to say, all right, let's agree on, they might start the negotiation and say they want to be on it 4 hours a day. Nope. So then you negotiate back to an hour a day or that kind of thing. And so is this kind of answering your question? So it's less around this fixation of specific times. It's more on the kid and thinking about it. And then if they're allowed, I'm just rereading it. When do you take it away? When they're giving me signs, when they're giving me other signs of it, the video game is interrupting sleep, when it's interrupting schoolwork, when it's interrupting life, and when they don't have other social outlets. So if their life is getting more heavily connected just to the video game and they don't have any in real life friends, that's a big deal as well. So Kim, did you want to comment to that as well, or?
No, I mean, I'm always beating the drum for modeling this kind of stuff too, and just sort of expressing our own fatigue with looking at screens and that sort of thing, and just saying like, I'm going to take a break. So I just always love the idea of modeling this and not demonizing it. If we're saying like, would you get off that thing? And, it's such an integral part of a young person's life that if we, as, sort of keep referring to it as this really negative thing, then it just puts up that wall with a young person, I believe.
100%. That next question, the next statement that came in, I completely agree. This in between classroom time and kids right in between, and not knowing how to like talk to kids, or not knowing how to look up to kids, or not knowing how to, think about it. When was the last time you were in line in Starbucks and you can turn around to everybody's on their devices and not talking to each other? And my wife might make fun of me, but I'm the guy that's going to chirp with you. I'm going to be like, hey, how's it going? Welcome to Starbucks. And I like to do that, to make that point, to connect with others. And so with schools, I know that some of the schools are looking at, specifically middle schools, about taking back and reevaluating and not having the devices in their schools in between classes, especially because, again, that's when kids learn that critical stage of learning how to interact and learning how to deal. So it's like, as soon as you can, take the class over, because if you think about it, kids are still reeling from what other text message or whatever thing that they saw on their device, even if it's not a video game, and you're trying to reel the class in. They need time and a minute or a moment to kind of pull themselves out of this. To give you an idea, as a professional, I desperately try not to check my text messages and emails between sessions if I'm in a flow, because I'll get pulled out by something that's happening. Does that make sense? So if you as an adult, back to Kim's point, parents are 1,000 school teachers, how you interact with your device, kids are watching, and sometimes adults are not as great either on social media. And so we want to model the behavior. We want to think about our digital footprint. We want to think about our digital dignity and how we show that and share that with others, because those are things that we need to teach our kids around digital dignity and digital footprint. Because again, I'll tell you this little hack. Most admissions offices from universities don't have the time to look at your kids' social media devices. Sorry, schools will create that myth, but I won't. However, the truth, parents will look at your kids' social media. Other parents will see and be like, I don't want my kid living with your kid in this dorm. So res life for college universities get overwhelmed every August with calls from parents of other parents saying, I don't want my kid living with this kid because I saw their social media and oh my gosh, they look like they party and I can't have this kid live with my kid. So you have to know that exists every fall at every major university. It's parents, and parents think and take things out of context, or take things out of context every day when it comes to social media. When I first gave this talk, and Kim remembers this years and years ago, there was this most downloaded app in 2007 or 8 was FML. And it was this little thing about like, oh, I spilled liquid on myself, or I spilled coffee on myself right before I was giving a talk for Kim. And then tagline FML. And it's F my life. I'm not going to curse, but it's like that line of like, oh, something happened to me and I was really upset about it, FML. And it was 99% really funny stuff, that self-disclosure, self-deprecation kind of language. But so many parents would call us and call therapist groups and say, my kid's on this thing called FML. I'm really worried about suicidality. Now, again, that's a real thing we have to investigate, but a lot of times taken out of context. Social media gets taken out of context every day. Text message threads get taken out of context, and we're adults. Think about kids. Adolescents take things out of context every day, and they think they have to live up to this lifestyle, live up to this piece. And that's why we need to have accurate conversations about how to interact with kids and how to interact with each other. So modeling behavior of hosting an event and not having technology out, or just being around a group of people, or going out to dinner. How many times have you been out to dinner and you'll see a nice restaurant and everybody's on their screens? It's like, try to leave the text, or try to leave your phones in your cars, just so you model that behavior, technology-free time, technology-free zone. Other questions? Or Kim, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, just kind of getting back to basics with this. I love all the stuff that you're sharing about technology, but what is it about being a young person? And, we always hear this instant gratification terminology. And I think that's probably where a lot of, and I don't even know if it's instant gratification, it's like instant escape, like what is it that I don't want to sit in with my feelings. So I'm going to, in some people, we do have exercise as a possible process addiction or behavioral addiction, right? And or shopping or food or other things besides technology. Technology is so readily available, and it is so working, against us, where we have those folks pushing out the cat videos and all that stuff. But what is it that what can we do to help young people with their comfort of sitting with their feelings? One thing I'll just mention too is we share, when we talk to parents of really young kids, about emotional vocabulary words, about encouraging conversations around, what do you think it feels like to feel disappointed? Or what do you think it feels like, or here's a list of vocabulary or emotional vocabulary. What are you feeling today? Is that something that is helpful at different ages, or any thoughts?
All ages. The Columbo method is my kind of line for that. And scratching your head and asking questions and trying to be inquisitive, inviting, as opposed to, again, the offset of like, you're doing this, I'm tired, you should do this differently. No, that's not going to work with a kid. It's communicating an invitational style questioning to ask a kid, hey, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? I notice, I see that identifiable behavior. I see that you're doing X. And I wonder, I'm just curious what that does for you. Do you notice that you're shopping more? Do you notice that retail therapy is this joke that got thrown around a little bit? But that's the truth. Like, people sometimes are quick to find something external to make their insides feel better. Sometimes it's the gym. Sometimes it's overexercise. And at first glance, it looks like a healthy thing. But then if they're doing it, and why are they doing something? So getting a kid to talk about their feelings is huge at any stage. So can't be too early, can't be too late. And that idea is like playing that part. And just because, again, as parents and people in recovery, we know we can't change somebody. You can't tell somebody what to do, but getting them to talk about their feelings and to start to identify, A, the problematic behavior, but B, what's the emotion that they're trying to self-soothe, self-regulate. And then the kicker is there anything else you can do instead of doing X? Is there anything else you can do as opposed to Y? What other things could you do besides gamble, or besides, look at clothing, or besides shop online? Is there other things that you can do? Is that what you're meaning, Kim?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and this emotional regulation skill of learning what your emotions are, because a lot of times people come in with the most misdiagnosed feeling is anger. Anger is either depression turned outward or depression turned inward. And so many of our youth, that's like the top layer soil feeling, but there's so many other feelings underneath the anger that get displaced onto anger. And so many kids feel upset, but they don't know why. So a lot of our work is getting the kid accurately assessing what's really happening for them, not telling a kid what to feel, but to get a kid to really identify what's feeling underneath so they could really do something about it and self-regulate it. So I just want to make sure. I thought I saw a question in the chat. So that's another big deal. So as opposed to kids that are trying, the other term, Kim, you said was instant gratification, looking for a quick fix, as opposed to sometimes the learning process is in the struggle. Sometimes we learn better in the process of growth, as opposed to, let me figure out these, how do I find the quick answer? What's the quick med? If I do this, then everything's going to feel better. Then it sets this up for this expectation of, if I only get this thing on Amazon, if I only get this one pill, if I just do this one thing, then everything's going to be better. And that's not accurate as well. And so kids are set up in the style, and PS in Instagram and other things, that they're saturated with. How many of us have seen, like, if I buy this, vegetable thing, A1 greens, I'm going to live 50 more years. Or if I buy this one thing, then I'll feel better about it, and I'll do this. And the next thing you know, we get inundated with sales, again, very scripted, very attached to our lifestyle based on identifiable, trackable behavior. So as adults, we're susceptible to really targeted marketing, just like kids are. But that, combined with, kids are normally naturally trying to figure out life. They're just trying to figure out where they connect. They try to figure out who they are or what they are. So again, pivoting the kid to ask them, where else can you find that connection? What other activities? So if it's a younger kid, getting exposed to different sports or activities or music or different interactive activities, so that they have to learn a game with another team member, or they have to learn an instrument with other people. Those interactive skills are so helpful and such a need to kind of have that growth period. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to, sometimes, I don't know if you know, whatever's come to me really quickly, I don't appreciate. The stuff that I've worked for in my life, that I've really given a lot of effort to, I appreciate so much. And you don't want to rob a kid of that appreciation. So sometimes the appreciation is in the struggle, and sometimes the struggle is what we need to learn how to grow and develop. And so don't rob a kid of the struggle. And sometimes the struggle is for them to learn how to have those connections and those relationships.
Couldn't agree more. And again, I hope you guys will chime in and ask any questions or put it in the chat. But I'll also just add that I'm very encouraged to see some schools incorporating lessons about mindfulness and meditation. Do you feel that that's something that could be really helpful to a young person, again, who's feeling stress, who's feeling all these pressures, I love what I heard somebody say, that it's essential to spend 30 minutes a day meditating, unless you're really busy, and then you should spend an hour a day meditating. So, I thought that was really cool. Like just that concept of, all the things that young people are experiencing coming at them, so all the overstimulation that they get with all the tech. How much do you recommend that for folks, for young people especially?
Sure. And I've done this as an exercise where I'll chart out literally a chart and graph and say, like, how much time are you on technology? How much time do you deal with other people? And then how much time do you have to really self-reflect, or self-reflection time? And they see it's like a huge graph of all this time spent on kind of stimuli and energy and other things. And then how much time do they have reflection time to really kind of make sense of it all? And you're right, we need that solace. You need that downtime. And I use the word solace to differentiate from isolation. I'm a big word guy, and I look at isolation as withdrawing and not wanting to feel, or kind of getting away from an emotion. That's what we want to watch out for. But solace is at peace with oneself. Solace to be centered with oneself and be cool with oneself. So absolutely, one form of therapy that I really do appreciate, that mindfulness-based therapy, and teaching kids mindfulness. And there's so many great apps, there's so many great YouTube videos, there's so many great opportunities for kids to listen, walking through mindfulness meditation to help them be at peace with self and just self-reflect and to really kind of figure out, what am I running away from? What is my impulse away from? Oh, it's not that bad. Sometimes they're caught in running and running and going and going. And when they realize, they turn around and realize their life's okay. Maybe they don't have to run. Maybe they don't have to if they slow down and pause and reflect. So absolutely, mindfulness meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, any type sometimes, and I'm not trying to sell you on therapy, but just even therapeutic interventions to slow down, to hold space for our youth to kind of find themselves or to turn around and see themselves. And it's not that bad. So does that make sense to people? So good. I know this only goes to 4:30, so I just want to make sure if there's any other questions in the chat. I keep pulling up just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Mike, there was a good question that we got previously, and it says, assuming that COVID is a factor in the anxiety we're seeing in teens today, will we see a shift in this as we move further away from the memory of COVID?
That absolutely, I have no idea. So short version, COVID actually played a part in highlighting the complexity of mental health issues underneath the surface. I think that's not going to change. But I think what may change is that COVID times of isolation and some of the reasons, rationales, we'll get away from. But I think highlighting the importance of connection, highlighting the importance that PS telehealth works, for instance, and some of the silver linings of COVID, I don't want to throw out. And I want to say that it's strengthened us as a community to connect like this, to do events like this, to find out that, wait a second, this could actually work in some respects. And so, yes, it had a factor. Yes, it'll be more right-sized in our history. But no, there's some traits and aspects of COVID, what I think are really important that we hold on to. So, great question. Was there other questions from the beginning thing? I think I got to it. Again, my salient punch from the messaging, from the questions I got, is going to an extreme to meet an adolescent with an extreme, to take it away. I wouldn't want to start with at all. I would start with conversations. I would start with negotiations. I would start with technology-free Tuesday nights. I would technology-free certain parts of the day to look at, the morning time, nighttime especially, and then to help kids develop other outlets, other opportunities to connect. And so that's another big thing as well. So.
Do you still advocate those technology contracts? Didn't you used to talk about that, forming a contract?
I do, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So for certain kids, they may need it written out, they may need it spelled out, and some families go to that place where they all bring their devices down at 10 o'clock at night and plug it into the plug-in downstairs. And so that's a really good thing to do. So contracts at any stage, and you can renegotiate the contract at any stage. So I have a 16-year-old grandson who recently started fishing with his friends. Lately, I suspect that they're doing drugs or alcohol. They're honors AP people. They're involved in sports. It's hard to not worry about them. He is an alcoholic grandfather, marijuana addict as an uncle. So you're worried if your child is actually fishing or not, literally fishing, because there's a term in fishing and technology. But they're literally fishing. That's great. So getting them outside, getting them around other kids, it's hard to trust sometimes. But if their grades are up, there's other factors that all looks that they're really good. We don't want to project our stuff from our lifespan onto our kids. We want to be mindful that your grandchild may not be your husband or other people in your life. So we try not to project onto our kids what we've been through ourselves. But look for patterns. Look for not just one event, but look for other things, not just one event, if that makes any sense at all. So
maybe ask him what he loves about fishing. Be curious to see, tell me about it, that experience. What's it like when you're out fishing? Just to encourage that and acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Caroline
tells the story a lot of when she was with Center for Families and they took away not took away, but the kids had to turn in their cell phones, and then they would go off and do a whole day's activities. And they were, all the staff was convinced that the kids would be like desperately clamoring for their phones the minute they had a chance. And they actually kind of forgot about it and were happy to not have them. And I've heard this is also with young people who go into inpatient treatment when they have to surrender their phone when they're admitted, and they actually kind of end up liking the break.
So one of my favorite stories of that, I think I told you that story, was that idea of the kid I sent to Newport Academy. They have equine therapy, they have ropes courses, they have all this experiential stuff. They have a nutritionist, they do all this great work. And I said to the kid, like I say to every kid that gets out of treatment, what was your best part of going away residential? And the kid says to me, I had 45 days without this. And they realized how much of an impact of not having this. Wow, they were able to really renegotiate this and have a big break in their life, once in their life, for 45 days. They weren't on it. And to this day, this young lady has a way better relationship with technology. And as a result, she's got a way better understanding of what she's up against. So that's a really good point as well. So taking a break, taking weekends away, nights away are so important. And you may fear that, oh my gosh, my kid's going to be really resistant, but try and see how it goes. And don't be afraid of your kids. They'll fight you just like they fought everything. They'll fight, but it's how we kind of meet them with the wall, and the healthy boundary. So that's good. Cool.
Well, we're right at 4:30. Mike, thank you so much. That was really terrific. And thank you all for staying with us. Appreciate it. I think Judy put everything in the chat. So you've got the survey that'll pop up when we finish. If you do want a certificate of attendance, this was not a CEU program, but I'm happy to send you a certificate of attendance. Just send me an email. Judy put that in the chat as well. So thank you, Mike. And thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Judy.